In the 1990s, the United States government made a decision that at the time seemed like a reasonable compromise between security and civil liberty. They required telecommunications companies, the companies that build and operate the infrastructure that carries your phone calls and internet traffic, to install deliberate vulnerabilities in their own systems, not weaknesses by accident. Weaknesses by design, built-in access points that law enforcement agencies could use, with a court order to intercept communications legally. The law was called CALEA, the Communications Assistance for Law Enforcement Act. It was passed in 1994. Its purpose was to ensure that as communications technology evolved, the FBI and other agencies retained the ability to conduct lawful wiretaps without needing the physical access to telephone lines that older interception technology had required. It made sense. It had oversight. It had legal process. And in late 2024 and into 2025, hackers operating on behalf of the Chinese government used those exact backdoors to achieve persistent, undetected access to the communications of senior American officials, journalists, political figures, and intelligence personnel. The system built to help the FBI catch criminals was what allowed a foreign state to own the American telecommunications grid. The operation is called Salt Typhoon, and it is one of the most consequential intelligence failures in American history. To understand Salt Typhoon, you need to understand what a lawful intercept backdoor actually is, and why building one is fundamentally different from any other kind of security design. Here is the misconception: that a backdoor built for legitimate law enforcement access can be secured against unauthorized use. That you can build a door that only the right people can open. Cryptographers and security researchers have been arguing for 30 years that this is impossible in principle. Not difficult, not expensive to get right. Impossible. Here is why. A backdoor is by definition a mechanism that bypasses the normal security controls of a system. It is an alternative pathway to access that exists specifically so that someone other than the primary user can get in. The security of a normal system depends on there being only one pathway, one that the user controls. The moment you add a second pathway, you have doubled the attack surface. You have created something that needs to be secured not just against ordinary attackers, but against everyone who might want to use it, including adversaries who are actively looking for it. The CALEA backdoors in American telecommunication systems were known to exist. They were legally mandated. The telecommunications companies were required to document them, maintain them, and make them accessible to authorized agencies. That documentation, that maintenance infrastructure, that accessibility, all of it represented a target, not a hypothetical target, an actual, specific, locatable target that any sufficiently sophisticated attacker would eventually find and attempt to exploit. Salt Typhoon found it. The scope of what happened is still not fully public. What has been disclosed by American intelligence officials and reported by the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, and other major outlets in late 2024 and 2025 is significant. Hackers affiliated with a Chinese state-sponsored group, designated Salt Typhoon by Microsoft, which tracks threat actors using weather naming conventions, gained access to the network infrastructure of multiple major American telecommunications providers. The list of affected carriers includes AT&T and Verizon, two of the largest telecommunications companies in the world.
Officials revealed that roughly 10 U.S. telecommunication companies had been infiltrated by Salt Typhoon, a hacker group tied to China's government. The hacked telecom companies include AT&T, Verizon, and T-Mobile, and several others. The Salt Typhoon hackers were found to have been spying on the phone calls and text messages of both the Harris and Trump campaigns, as well as the office of then Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. It was later revealed that Salt Typhoon successfully hacked.
The access was not brief, it was persistent. In some cases, the intrusion appears to have gone undetected for months. What the attackers accessed was not simply call records or metadata, the logs of who called whom and when. They accessed, in some cases, the actual content of communications. More significantly, they gained access to the lawful intercept systems themselves, the CALEA infrastructure. This means they could see, in real time, which targets American law enforcement and intelligence agencies were monitoring. They could potentially see the content of those monitored communications. They had access to a live map of American surveillance operations. The targets of the surveillance that Salt Typhoon could observe reportedly included individuals associated with both major American political campaigns ahead of the 2024 presidential election. The FBI and the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, issued a joint advisory in late 2024 confirming the breach and urging American officials to switch to encrypted communications platforms. The irony is precise and brutal. The agencies whose surveillance capabilities had been exposed were now advising the public to use the kind of end-to-end encrypted communications that those same agencies had spent years lobbying against on the grounds that such encryption would prevent lawful interception. Before we go further, if you find yourself asking questions you never thought to ask, subscribe. We put out one of these every week. It takes 30 seconds and it means you will not miss the next one. The Salt Typhoon breach is not an isolated incident. It is the most dramatic illustration yet of a strategic vulnerability that the American intelligence and law enforcement community has been warned about repeatedly, consistently, and in increasingly urgent terms. In 2015, a group of cryptographers and security researchers, including some of the most respected names in the field, published a paper called Keys Under Doormats. The title is The Analogy. Requiring telecommunications companies to maintain lawful intercept backdoors is like requiring everyone to leave a spare key under their doormat for law enforcement. The key is there for legitimate use, but it is also there for anyone else who looks for it. The paper argued that the technical and governance challenges of maintaining secure backdoor access were not engineering problems that better design could solve. They were fundamental. Any system that allows authorized third-party access creates a vulnerability that sophisticated attackers will eventually find and exploit. The question is not whether the backdoor will be compromised. The question is when and by whom. The authors of that paper were told at the time that they were being alarmist, that the government had safeguards, that the legal process surrounding lawful intercept requests provided sufficient protection. Salt Typhoon is the answer to that argument. The Chinese operation did not need to defeat the legal safeguards. It did not need a court order. It found the technical infrastructure that the court orders were designed to access, and it accessed that infrastructure directly. The law was bypassed not by circumventing the courts, but by circumventing the systems the courts relied on. The response from American officials and the telecommunications industry has moved through predictable phases: initial denial of the full scope, partial disclosure, damage assessment, and a pivot to remediation. What remediation looks like is complicated. The CALEA framework is a federal legal requirement. Telecommunications carriers cannot simply remove the lawful intercept infrastructure; they are legally mandated to maintain it. The vulnerability that Salt Typhoon exploited is, in a meaningful sense, not a bug. It is a feature that was built by law, maintained by law, and compromised by a state actor sophisticated enough to find it. The debate that Salt Typhoon has forced back into public view is the same debate that has been running since the 1990s crypto wars, the period when the U.S. government attempted to mandate that all encryption systems include government-accessible key escrow, and was eventually defeated by a coalition of technologists, civil libertarians, and businesses who argued that secure encryption was essential to the internet economy. That debate was not resolved. It was deferred. The government accepted that it could not mandate weak encryption for consumer products, but maintain the CALEA requirements for telecommunications infrastructure. Salt Typhoon is the deferred cost of that compromise. The Senate Commerce Committee held hearings in late 2024. The FBI director, when asked directly whether the CALEA backdoors should be reconsidered in light of the breach, gave an answer that was notable for what it did not say. He acknowledged the severity of the intrusion. He did not call for the removal of the lawful intercept requirements. Here's the honest version of where this leaves you. Every phone call you make, every text message you send through a standard SMS system, every communication that passes through the infrastructure of a major American telecommunications carrier passes through systems that were deliberately designed to be interceptable. That design is legal, it is documented, and it has been accessed by at least one foreign intelligence service. The security researchers who warned this would happen were right. The government officials who dismissed those warnings were wrong. The people currently arguing that encryption backdoors can be made safe are making the same argument that was made about CALEA in 1994. The evidence of the last 30 years suggests that argument is incorrect. Salt Typhoon is not the end of this story. It is a chapter in an ongoing argument about the relationship between security, privacy, and the legitimate needs of law enforcement in a world where almost all sensitive communication is digital. That argument is not going to be resolved easily, But the next time you hear a government official argue that lawful access backdoors can be built securely, remember the name Salt Typhoon. And remember that the door they built for the FBI was the door that China walked through. Subscribe, and we'll keep finding the ones that break the model.